And joining us today, LG Seeds agronomist Dan Mitchell is with us. And Dan, appreciate you making time to be on the show with me today. How are you?
I'm doing great, Jesse.
Thank you for joining us again. And let's talk a little bit here as we're getting into the growing season now across much of the country. Let's talk some early season steps to help us kind of pave the way for a big corn crop. I know there's a couple tips that LG Seeds recently shared. Let's go through those and maybe talk to us a little bit about just what would be the first big tip here to help us try and get to a big corn crop this year.
Well, I guess most importantly, you've got to start at the beginning. So that would be just shortly after planting, or even prior to that. We got to make sure that that crop gets off to a good, clean, early start. That begins with your herbicide program. We really ask guys to look at the theme of start clean, stay clean from a herbicide situation because early wheat growth can really take a hit on a crop, especially your grassy weeds. They sap moisture and nutrients both. So getting that good clean start. Uh, the other thing that we have had a lot of debate on this spring is the source of starter fertilizers or nitrogen fertilizers. A lot of guys have debated with the extremely high cost of inputs this year. The uh, the nitrogen rates have been probably well debated. I've heard some guys who are going to cut back quite a bit. They're putting all of their nitrogen up front one time, which is generally not the definitely not the most agronomically sound situation. But from an economic standpoint, some guys are going to do what they think is right. We would strongly encourage splitting that nitrogen into 2 and 3 applications and getting it spread out through the season where the crop actually needs it, especially later on.
Very true. I would think, as well, you talk about some of those nitrogen applications and a lot of folks, maybe those dollar signs, they're looking at skipping that side dressing as you alluded to and, looking more at corn. I would think some of those later stages, V6, V8 would be important times to get a little bit of nitrogen on with some side dressing.
Absolutely. That's from a side dressing standpoint, where they're using dry urea or anhydrous ammonia is used commonly in the Midwest. As you go farther south, you use more of the dry products. But absolutely, getting the nitrogen in a timely fashion, where it's number two is where it's not wasted because putting it all up front, you're at the complete mercy of the weather, rainfall, and whatever. Actually, diluting that nitrogen, and you're sending dollars down the creek, basically.
Yeah. I could definitely see that. I know as well too as we get into the growing season. I would think another tip would be controlling those weeds. And I know you alluded to this a little bit as well, but looking at some of those fungicides as well as we get into the growing season, Dan.
Yes, the fungicides generally have come into play a little later in the season, and that begins with probably about the V12 and stage and beyond, where guys would really need to monitor for the disease. While fungicides are really good, they are not always needed. We really encourage guys to scout and apply only when necessary. In most cases, however, we do have some diseases that become pretty rampant. Southern corn rust is one of those that can come up from the south and obliterate a crop pretty quickly. So it's a matter of if you see it coming or hear it coming, be prepared to spray or go ahead and spray and get that protection on your crop.
I would wonder as well. I should ask, we've seen varying conditions across the country this year. Some areas, especially the northwestern corn belt, extremely wet. Some areas have had normal rainfall. Some are still a little dry. Are there any concerns about disease pressures, whether it be in a very wet area or a very dry area, as we get into this growing season, Dan?
Well, typically, and I have looked at some fields. I'm going to look some more today on some later planted corn that was put in cool, wet conditions here in the last 10 days, and we're having emergence issues because of the cooler soils, the saturated soils, and we're having some insect problems that can be an issue. So, bottom line is, we need to get that crop out of the ground and growing as fast as possible.
Well, Dan, if growers need some advice, I know they can reach out to an agronomist such as yourself with LG Seeds if they're getting into those fields and scouting and looking, or as they're getting planting wrapped up and getting into the growing season. If they need advice with anything with their management program, they can always reach out, can't they?
They absolutely can. We have a whole group, large group of sales agronomists scattered across the Corn Belt and actually the entire country. Since we are a national brand, we've got it pretty much covered from coast to coast.
Dan, any other final thoughts as we look at our corn crop here this year across the country, and we're hoping for a big crop? Any other final thoughts you want to share with us today?
No, we can only hope that the prices hold accordingly with the input costs.
I would definitely agree with that. You can also learn more online, lgseeds.com. With that, LG Seeds agronomist Dan Mitchell, appreciate the time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jesse.